scheduled a resolution for debate to disapprove of the FCC's new Internet and broadband rules, and you can see
The Senate will come to order. The chaplain, Dr. Barry Black, will lead the Senate in prayer.
Let us pray. Immortal, invisible, God only wise, you know our needs before we ask you, but wait to bless us until we ask you for your help. So, Lord, we're asking you to fill our lawmakers with energy for the task you have assigned their hands to do. Let no pride of power betray them into rejecting your precepts and purposes, but help them face the challenges of these difficult times with a total dependence on you. Lord, save us from ourselves as you help us to remember that in our nation's history, well-meaning people have sown to the wind but reaped the whirlwind. While our military men and women risk and give their lives for liberty overseas, may we be willing to sacrifice for freedom at home. Lord, without your help, we cannot succeed. With your power, we cannot fail. We pray in your merciful name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., April 8, 2011. To the Senate, under the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Mark R. Warner, a senator from the Commonwealth of Virginia, to perform the duties of the chair, signed Daniel K. Inouye, President pro tempore.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Following any leader remarks, there will be a period of morning business until 4 o'clock this afternoon for debate only, with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each during this time, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or the designees. Mr. President, we're very hopeful that we can reach an agreement on the budget today. We'll have more to say about that in a few minutes. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. I now ask unanimous consent the Senate recess from 1 o'clock this afternoon until 2 o'clock this afternoon in order to allow for a special Democratic caucus meeting.
Without objection.
Mr. President, there are 2 bills at the desk due for second reading.
Clerk will read the titles of the bill for the second time.
H.R. 1255, an act to prevent a shutdown of the government of the United States and for other purposes. S-768, a bill to provide for continuing operations of government in a fiscally responsible manner.
Mr. President, I object to the further proceedings in regard to these bills en bloc.
Objection is heard. The bills will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, I've been married for a long time, more than 50 years. We have one daughter, 9 grandchildren. I love these women very, very much. One day, though, I may not be able to help them. And one of them may need a cancer screening. It's not a pleasant thought, but that's the reality of life, that I may not be around to help them when they need something. Over their lives, they'll be in need of other things, like a cholesterol check, maybe their blood pressure screening, tests that are less serious, but just important to a woman's health. They should be able to get the test that could save their lives. So should every single woman in America. I believe that, and frankly, that's not so controversial. It's not so controversial of a belief. Some women, of course, have doctors. Others, including many of the poorest among us, don't. So where do they go to get blood pressure, or cholesterol, or a cancer screening? Where do they go? Thankfully, there's a little-known part of a little-known law that saves many lives. It's called Title 10, and it's part of a public health law. And it means that women and girls can go to their local health department or community clinic and get these tests. Mr. President, more than 5 million women use these centers for Title 10 coverage every year. 5 million. 5 million. One of them could be my granddaughter or my daughter. Mr. President, some watching us today, and we know the whole world's watching us today, may be asking why I'm talking about women's health, when the question before us is the budget of the biggest economy on the planet Earth. Some may ask why we're talking about the smallest corner of planet Earth. With the government shut down looming not weeks away or days away, but hours away, why are we talking about whether women can keep getting something as simple and non-controversial as a cancer screening? The answer is, Mr. President, that Republicans want to shut down our nation's government because they want to make it harder for women to get the health services they need. And by the way, Title 10 does not include abortion. It's illegal to use federal funds for abortion services. So anyone who says this debate is over abortion isn't being truthful. It's about simple and important health services. Republicans want to shut down the government because they think there's nothing more important than keeping women from getting cancer screenings. This is indefensible, and everyone should be outraged. Men and women should be outraged. The Republican House leadership have only a few hours left to look in the mirror, snap out of it, and realize how positively shameful it would be, Mr. President. For months, this conversation has been about billions and trillions of dollars. It's been about weighty issues and difficult decisions. This debate is about saving money. That's what we thought it was about. But no longer. We have an agreement on the cuts and savings. I was there in the White House last night. And that agreement includes a historic level of cuts. We've always recognized we had to make cuts. That's why we agreed in the White House last night to make significant cuts. Hard, but important. But now, the Tea Party, among others, but they're the biggest push, is trying to move its extreme social agenda, issues that have nothing to do with funding the government. They're willing, it appears, clearly, to throw women under the bus, even if it means they'll shut down the government, because that's where we are. That is the one issue that was remaining last night. That agenda is an extreme agenda. I don't agree with their ideas on social policy, but in our democracy, those ideas, however radical or however you may disagree with them, deserve a debate if they want one. That's fair. But that debate doesn't belong in an urgent bill to keep the government running. And it especially doesn't belong here at this late hour. The consequences of letting our country's funding expire would be devastating. Almost 1 million federal employees, Mr. President, people who work for the Bureau of Land Management, not a big presence in the presiding officer state, but a huge presence. The state of Nevada is 87% owned by the federal government. Forest Service employees, FBI employees, Internal Revenue Service employees, people who work in this great government complex. Almost 1 million of them are waiting on pins and needles. Federal employees are like everybody else. They're working from paycheck to paycheck. They're wondering if they're going to be able to get that new car they've needed for 3 or 4 years. They're wondering if they're, with summer coming, are they going to be able to take that vacation that they've wanted to for a long time? That's what the federal employees are like everybody else. The consequences of letting our country's funding expire would be devastating to people, individuals. It would be devastating to our troops, to our small businesses, and to Americans' everyday lives. People who just want to get a home loan, or get their tax refund, or, I repeat, their paycheck. It would damage our image and credibility around the world. But Republicans are asking me to sacrifice my wife's health, my daughter's health, and my 9 granddaughters' health. They're asking me to sacrifice the health of women in Nevada and all across this country. But, Mr. President, I'm not going to be part of that. I won't do it. As a legislator, I'm very frustrated. As an American, I'm appalled. As a husband, a father, and a grandfather, I'm personally offended. Would the Chair announce morning business now, please?
In the previous order, leadership time is reserved, and the Senate will be in a period of morning business until 4 p.m., with senators permitted to speak then for up to 10 minutes each. Time equally divided and controlled between the 2 leaders or their designees, and any time spent in quorum call will be equally divided. Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, at this very critical time in our country's history, time when we have over a $14 trillion debt, and we are desperately trying to find ways to reduce government spending, and there looms the possibility of a government shutdown, I think that we would be best served to try to provide some information to our constituents, and as politicians resist the temptation to throw rotten apples at each other. And I think also it would be wise for media to not hype or overhype a situation regarding government shutdown, but try to put things into perspective. And so let me try to do that here for a moment this morning. In the first place, obviously, we're trying to reach agreement. I compliment the Majority Leader, Senator Reid, who just spoke, the Speaker of the House, John Boehner, for their efforts to get together, bridge the differences between the 2 parties, the 2 bodies, and to reach an agreement. And in the last 2 or 3 days, the President has also weighed in on the issue, and he, too, I think, is trying very hard to help the parties reach an agreement. Notwithstanding that fact, under the law, tonight at midnight, the funding for much of the government stops, and the question is what can be done about that. The House of Representatives has passed a bill. They passed it yesterday. The Senate could take that bill up and pass it. It would keep the government running for another week. It would provide full funding for the military, not just for another week, but for the entire rest of the year. That is a reasonable measure to keep the government running. It also, by the way, reduces $12 billion in spending, and most of that spending, I'm informed, has already been agreed to by the administration and would be included in any longer-range continuing resolution. Well, what happened? The President said he would veto that bill. That's a very puzzling thing, because if we're all seeking to fund the government, at least until there can be an agreement on a long-term resolution, one would think that we would try to keep it going for another week and that we would adopt what the House did, especially since it provides funding for the military. The President described in his veto message, he said that the bill was a distraction. And I do have to take issue with that. It's not a distraction. It's what's necessary to keep the government running. Let me get back to that in just a moment. What would happen if we're able to reach agreement by tonight? If we're able to reach agreement before midnight, then at least theoretically both bodies, the House and Senate, could pass a very short-term 2 or 3 day stopgap measure in order to have the time to complete the work on the full measure and then adopt that sometime next week. And that would avert a shutdown. It's possible also that because in the Senate it would require unanimous consent, somebody might disagree with that process and would object. In that case, it would take a few days for us to do in effect, the paperwork to get this done, and that would then result in a government shutdown during that time, at least over the course of the weekend. That should be avoided, if at all possible. But while there would be some dislocations and inconveniences, I do think the media exaggerates a little bit the result of a shutdown over the weekend. The biggest problem, from my perspective, is that the military doesn't get paid during that period of time. Now, they will get paid, but it's a disruptive thing when you've got young military families trying to make ends meet and sometimes living from paycheck to paycheck to have that disrupted. And that's why I think it makes so much sense to adopt what the House passed yesterday so that we have the time, the week, to complete the work on the continuing resolution that would fund the government through the end of the fiscal year, that is to say through the end of September, and then not have to worry about a government shutdown and especially funding the military. There's a question that has been raised that's very logical. Why can't the parties get together? Why can't you just split the difference? Well, in ordinary times, it might be possible to reach an agreement that way, but these are not ordinary times. We're talking about a country that's on the verge of not being able to pay its debts. The President himself has asked us to raise the debt ceiling, I believe sometime next month, that in effect we run out not only of money, but of the capacity to borrow. Our credit card, in effect, the government's credit card is full up, and we can't get any more credit unless we go to the credit card company and say, would you extend the amount of money we can borrow? In that case, it's the Congress passing a bill. We're in a very difficult position in this country, and everyone knows we're passing a lot of our debts on to future generations. We need to get a handle on that, and I don't think anybody disagrees with the proposition that means we need to cut spending. And that's what this exercise is all about. So it's not just the usual thing of splitting the difference. We're talking about big spending cuts. And I was disappointed in the majority leader's comments just now. He said this debate is about saving money. Indeed it is. And yet it appears that the one thing, and this is what he said. Now, I don't tend to believe this is correct. But in effect what he was saying is it all boils down to a $300 and some million subsidy for Planned Parenthood. I do not believe that that's really what is keeping us from allowing the government to continue to operate. The majority leader has been in the negotiations. He's in a position to say that. If that's the case, then it seems to me we're in a very untenable position here, at least the majority leader is, because Planned Parenthood is not the only entity that can provide medical care in this country. It gets a subsidy of something like $300 and some million a year. To shut down the government over that would be absolutely unthinkable. Now, the majority leader never said Planned Parenthood, you notice. He said Title 10. Well, Title 10 doesn't receive a subsidy. Planned Parenthood is what receives the subsidy. Everybody goes to clinics, to hospitals, to doctors, and so on. Some people go to Planned Parenthood. But you don't have to go to Planned Parenthood to get your cholesterol or your blood pressure checked. If you want an abortion, you go to Planned Parenthood, and that's well over 90% of what Planned Parenthood does. So this is a red herring to say that somehow the government's going to be shut down over the fact that Planned Parenthood won't get a $300 million gift from the taxpayers of America would be absolutely irresponsible. If that's what the majority leader is saying, it is irresponsible. I can't believe that that's really the fact of what is holding up this agreement from being reached. As I said, we have this the bill before us, which would provide for a week-long continuation of the government with a $12 billion reduction in spending and a full funding of the military through the end of the year. And it seems to me that that is a very reasonable proposition. We don't have to worry about shutting the government if we adopt that. And I said I'd get back to the President's message. He said that it would be a distraction when he said he would veto that bill to keep the government running and to fully fund the military. He said it would be a distraction. His exact word is, this bill is a distraction from the real work that would bring us closer to a reasonable compromise. Well, I don't see how it's a reasonable a distraction if it provides another week for us to complete the work to be done, and it's obvious that we're going to need time to get the work done because neither the House nor the Senate can get everything that would have to be done completed by midnight tonight. The House has a requirement that they have any bill pending for 72 hours before it's adopted. This continuing resolution clearly would have to be posted for 72 hours. Do we want to shut the government down during that period of time because the President thinks that the bill to do so is a distraction? I find that incomprehensible, frankly. And also just want to make this final point, Mr. President. The discussion about reducing government spending is not just because we're having trouble borrowing from borrowers now. Over half of, well, about 42 cents on every dollar that we spend now is borrowed from someone, and about half of that is from foreign entities. But it's also because as the government spends more and more money, the private sector has less money to invest and spend. And it is the private sector that creates jobs. What we need to do is spend less government money, not only to get ourselves out from under this huge debt burden, but also to allow the private economy to have the resources to grow. And included in that, of course, is to hire more people. On April 4th, the Wall Street Journal had an op-ed by Dr. John Taylor, a noted economist from Stanford, Gary Becker, a Nobel laureate in economics, George Shultz, former three different secretaries serving in two different cabinets, all experts in financial fiscal matters. And what they wrote in this, and they called it Time for a Budget Game Changer, is the following sentence, or two sentences. Credible actions that reduce the rapid rate of growth of federal spending and debt will raise economic growth and lower the unemployment rate. Higher private investment, not more government purchases, is the surest way to increase prosperity. So, Mr. President, what we're talking about here is not drastic cuts for austerity's sake, but rather sensible reductions to create prosperity in this country. That's what we're talking about doing here. That's why I support what Speaker Boehner has been trying to do. And I urge my colleagues, instead of, as I said, throwing rotten apples at each other here and trying to preach a doom and gloom game, let's focus on what this country can do in a positive and constructive way to get our economy going again and to get our people back to work.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today in shock and anger that after weeks of negotiations, after pledges from Republicans to come to the table in good faith, after repeated assurances that they want to talk about principles and budget numbers and not politics, after all the hot rhetoric that we have heard about concern for our troops and our workers and the veterans who will be hurt, Republicans have decided to hold the federal budget hostage to their extreme social agenda. Mr. President, it is now clear that this is not a debate in the last hours before this government shuts down about how much to cut. It is about whether or not women in this country will have access to basic health care services. Mr. President, as a woman, as a mother, as a grandmother, I find that appalling. They can say whatever they want to on the other side. But if they want to say this is about numbers, then I challenge them to say Title X is off the table. Mr. President, millions of women in this country and men, their only access to preventive health care services, pregnancy diagnosis, counseling, preventive health services, cervical and breast cancer screening, sexually transmitted disease and HIV prevention education, a broad range of access to contraceptive methods. That's what Republicans now, in the 11th hour, are holding hostage to a government shutdown. Mr. President, I don't think anyone in America thought that this last election was about that. We heard the promises about the economy, about cutting budgets, about fiscal concerns, But we never heard from anyone that they would be willing to shut down this government and put this country at risk over an ideological debate about women's health care. Well, Mr. President, I have 3 words for them. Women are pawns. We are not pawns. We will not be pawns in this debate, and we will not give in. The access to these critical services are so important to so many young women in this country. I've told the story, and I'll tell it again. Just a few days ago, I heard from this young woman in my state who, at 18 years old, had to leave an extremely abusive family situation, out on the street on her own. She has cervical cancer that runs in her family. The only way she was able to get the medication and care she needed was through Title X federal funding through a clinic in her state. She and 5 million others in this country depend on that. And we're going to take this away at the 11th hour in order to get an agreement? Mr. President, not on my watch. Not on the watch of millions of American families in this country who know that access to women's health care is basic to them and their families and their community. What kind of country are we that at the 11th hour on a debate like this, the issue remaining is about women's health care? I find that stunning. Families across my state are hurting. They've lost their jobs. They're worried about getting a pink slip. Their housing prices have dropped. They're worrying about making their mortgage. And this debate now has come to this, an issue of access to Title X funding for preventive health care for women. Mr. President, we need to focus on the economy. Yeah, there's going to be some budget cuts in this that are going to be extremely hard for me and for many others who care about investing in education and jobs. But we know we have to come to an agreement. But we will not let women be used as pawns in this debate at this 11th hour. Mr. President, we're not going to allow this debate to end by cutting off funding for health clinics across America that are often the only place for low-income women. In my state of Washington, over 100,000 patients depend on these clinics to provide prevention. Over 3 million Americans do nationwide. We're not going to let the threat of a shutdown make us fade away. Women are going to stand tall, and men with them across the country to say, not on our watch. Women aren't pawns. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Republican leader.
Proceed on my leader time.
Senator has that right.
Mr. President, the American people have heard a lot of excuses over the past few days as to why it is that we're standing at a potential government shutdown here in Washington. Now, our good friends on the other side of the aisle are saying it's over social issues. This plays nicely into a political strategy they've decided on to distract people from their own fiscal recklessness. Republicans say the holdup is over the need to reduce Washington spending. The Democrats, including the President, would rather see the government shut down than to allow a reduction in the size and scope of Washington that is perfectly reasonable by any objective standard. Those are the competing messages. And generally speaking, people will probably agree with the party they tend to vote for. But whichever side you come down on, two things are not in dispute in this debate. First, that the whole reason we're in this mess is that Democrats abdicated their responsibility to keep the government funded through this year. That's why we are where we are. And second, the Democrats have rejected the only plan out there, the only one, that keeps the government open, the bipartisan troop funding bill, for no apparent reason. The President says he'll veto it, but he doesn't say why. And Democrats in Congress won't vote for it, even though it funds the Defense Department and keeps the government operational and makes reasonable cuts in spending. In other words, what Democrats are saying at this point is that they'd rather see the government shut down either because they won't accept a modest amount
of spending cuts that fall well within the range of what Democrats previously described as reasonable, or because they won't reinstate a long-standing policy related to one American city that members of both parties, including the presidents of both parties, have approved repeatedly in the past. The majority leader said yesterday that this particular provision relates to an issue that we've been unable to reach agreement on for 40 years. My response is that this is actually one of the few areas of agreement both parties have agreed on this issue for years. Let's be very clear about this. If the government shuts down, it's either because Democrats are pretending that a previously non-controversial provision is suddenly out of bounds, or they refuse to take another baby step in the direction of balancing the government checkbook, something we know the American people want. Neither reason is worth a shutdown, especially when neither side actually wants one. And that's why I believe there will be an agreement here shortly. I've been in many negotiations over the years. I assure you, these are not unresolvable issues. So my suggestion this morning is that both sides sit back and give the negotiators a few more hours to work this out. Let Senator Reid talk with his conference, let the Speaker talk to his, and let's just hold off on the speculation and the back and forth for just a little while here. Both sides are working hard to reach the kind of resolution Americans desire. A resolution is actually within reach. The contours of a final agreement are coming into focus. There's virtually nothing in the troop funding bill Republicans in the House passed yesterday that won't be included in the final package. So let's not disrupt and derail that agreement. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Senator from Illinois. Mr. President, let's make it clear where we are at this moment in time. There is an agreement. There is agreement on the budget number. It was an agreement reached between the President, with Speaker Boehner, and with Senate Majority Leader Reid. Agreement on the spending cuts for the remainder of this year. It was reached last night in the White House, and then it fell apart. Not because of a change of heart when it came to the number, but rather because of the insistence of the House Republicans that they would not let us keep this government functioning. They would not let us pass a budget resolution for the remainder of this year unless we were prepared to virtually devastate the Title X family planning program. Let me ask you something. In the big national debate in the last election over the future of our country and what we would do with our deficit, how many times do you remember that issue coming up? Exactly none. This issue over Title X has been brought in by the House Republicans at the last moment. It has virtually no impact on government spending, virtually none, and yet they insist on it. Why? Well, it is because of problems within the House Republican caucus. The Speaker of the House, John Boehner, whom I know and respect and like, is surrounded by lean and hungry colleagues challenging his value, his resolve, and his leadership. This House power struggle has now reached a point where we face a government shutdown and a showdown on whether or not we are going to provide basic health care access for women across America. First, understand, not one penny, not a penny in Title X funds can be spent on abortion, other than the strictly limited provisions of the Hyde Amendment, which have been the law of the land for decades, agreed to by virtually all Republicans and Democrats. It's about access to cancer screening. It's about pap smears, breast screening. It's about screening for infectious disease. And here's what it means. If we cut off the funding, as the Republicans ask, for women to have access to affordable health care for their basic health, it isn't, as the senator from Arizona says, just a matter of whether they'll knock on the next door down the street at a doctor's office. It's whether they'll have any care at all. This is the lowest price health care for people who struggle to survive day by day. And if we fail to provide that health care, we endanger their health, and we run the risk that without access to family planning, they will have unintended pregnancies and sadly, even more abortions in this country. If you really believe, as I do personally, that we should try to reduce the number of abortions in America, how can you do what the House Republicans are asking us to do and close down access to family planning? In my state of Illinois, it is estimated that if Title X were eliminated, we would have a 24% increase in abortions in our state. I don't want to see that. I consider myself a person who is personally opposed to abortion, but believe it's up to a woman and her doctor and her family and her conscience. But for goodness sakes, shouldn't women, rich and poor alike, have access to family planning? That's part of what this debate comes down to. And I would say to my colleague over here, Senator McConnell, the Republican leader, he blames us for not coming up with a spending bill for this year and putting us in this mess. My memory is a little better than his. I remember in December when we brought the spending bill to the floor and he objected to it. He objected to it, even though the spending targets in that bill were exactly what he had asked for before the Senate Appropriations Committee. That put us into this current showdown. Here's what I think we should do. Let's not close down this government. Let's face this hour of decision responsibly. Let's say to the millions of critical federal employees across America who are basically keeping America safe, making sure that our planes are safe in the air, tending to the business of this great nation, that they can come to work, because the government will not close at midnight. Let us acknowledge that we have agreed on the amount of deficit reduction, the amount of spending cuts, and move forward. But let's also agree. Let's agree to save to another day all these other debates about all these other issues, whether it's the Environmental Protection Agency or Title X. There's plenty of time and opportunity for senators and House members to give speeches till they're red in the face over these issues and to call for a vote. But let us not close down the government of the United States of America over the access of women to basic health care. That is what the House Republicans are insisting on, and it is the wrong fight at the wrong time. It is important for us to step up and step forward and understand that if we do not invest a modest amount in preventive health care so that women can learn their health status before small problems become large problems, so that women can plan their family future, so that people understand what their health status is, if we don't invest in that preventive care, we will pay dearly for it, not only in terms of dollars spent, but in terms of human suffering. That's something that we should rise above. That's something that we should care about enough to put aside and say, keep the government open. My plea now to Speaker Boehner is, you have fought the good fight. We are at the 11th hour. Do not let us reach the depths of despair by closing down our government and sending a message across the world that there's something wrong with this American form of government. There's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with it. The people of good faith responsibly stepping forward and accepting their duty in the House and Senate can't cure by agreeing today. Let's do it. In this hour of decision, let's get it done. Senator Kerry spoke yesterday in our Senate Democratic Caucus lunch. And, John, I still remember your words of what an embarrassment it will be to the United States if our government is shut down. In the eyes of the world, so many people respect this great nation, and I'm glad they do, and I do too. But to allow a government shutdown at this moment in our history is a sad commentary. Let us not shut down the government of the United States of America over the question of whether women will have access to affordable health care and preventive health care across the United States. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
Mr. President, I think that everyone, or virtually everyone, in the United States Senate does not believe that we should shut down government. The question is, what are the negotiations? And I'm not privy to them, and neither is anyone on this floor, about what are still the sticking points. We all we all believe it is our responsibility to assure that government doesn't shut down and to come to an agreement because, Mr. President, this is a 6-month bill. This is to the end of the fiscal year that we are trying to negotiate. It is a very small part of the big picture, which is we must get the deficit down, which is projected under the current budget that has been put forward at $1.5 trillion. That is wrong, and that's what we ought to be addressing. We ought to be looking at the numbers that we can bring down so that we start getting this budget deficit down, so that our debt starts coming down, and we can see an economy that is thriving through the private sector job creation. That's what we ought to be doing. But, Mr. President, because there is so much debate and because there is such disagreement about what is holding up the agreement for that 6-month plan, there is something that is gaining a momentum in this country that I want to assure that everyone knows, and I was notified of it this morning through an email into my website. And it was from a woman that I don't know, and she said, my husband is active duty in the Navy, and I just wanted to let you know there is a Facebook campaign supporting Senate Bill 724. Please click the link below because there are 437,000 people who have signed on that they agree with it. This is what America thinks about military pay being cut. Because Senate Bill 724 that was put forward by myself and Senator Casey, who came on board, which now has 58 sponsors, is about making sure that no matter what happens in the next 12 hours, no matter what happens with the government shutdown, that there will be no question in the minds of our military and their families that they will be paid on time. Because there's no question they're going to come to work. And I do not want 1 day or 1 hour of delay in the payment for our military. We have about 100,000 people in Afghanistan today putting their lives on the line wherever they are in that country. And we have 47,000 in Iraq. Now, for the people back home, and I've already heard from one wife who has a 1-year-old child whose husband is in Afghanistan, who says, thank you for remembering that we have mortgages to pay and our husbands aren't here to help us or do anything about it. So I want to say that we have now, in the hour since we got this note, we went on the website. The website is called Ensuring Pay for Our Military Act of 2011, which is the name of our bill. It now has 639,212 who have signed on in support of this website. The people of our country know that there is one option we don't have, and that is to pass a freestanding bill that will assure, whatever the other disagreements are, that our military pay will be on time for the work that is being performed. America understands that, and I am asking the United States Senate to join. And, Mr. President, I do want to ask a unanimous consent for co-sponsors to be added to my bill. Senator Mark Pryor, Senator John Bozeman, Senator Michael Bennet, Senator Max Baucus, Senator Johnny Isakson, Senator Mark Kirk, and Senator Tim Johnson.
Without objection.
That brings the total to 58. Senator Casey has been a wonderful supporter in this. He is the lead co-sponsor. 58 United States senators have stepped up to the plate and said, this is not an option for us to equivocate for 1 minute. So, Mr. President, I'm waiting to get 2 more co-sponsors, which will show that we have 60, and that we want to act as a United States Senate, and I am hoping that Senator Casey and I could get the ability to bring our bill up and pass it. It's very simple, very clear. Military pay and those who are serving our military in civilian capacities will not be delayed because they're going to report to work, and they need to have the peace of mind to know that the mortgages that they have, maybe on direct lines to the mortgage companies, are going to be covered. That is the very least that we could do as we are arguing about whose fault it is going to be if we have a shutdown. We need to say, first of all, it is our first priority not to have a shutdown, and we need to be able to come to an agreement. And, Mr. President, we need to take the further action, and I hope we can do it very quickly, of just saying we're going to assure with this simple bill our military will be paid. And if we send this to the House of Representatives, my guess is they, too, will pass it.
Yield.
I will yield.
I'd like to ask consent to be added as a co-sponsor to your legislation.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Without objection.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. That makes 59. And I do hope that...
Mr. President, will the senator yield?
I will yield.
I'd like to be asked to be added as a co-sponsor as well. May already be on that, but... Without objection.
Senator Warner, was Senator Warner on? Senator Warner, you're 60. We now have the ability to pass a piece of legislation. Whatever happens on this floor, we have 60 votes who have committed to supporting our troops and assuring them that there is no equivocation in this United States Senate for having their pay on time, because they'll be doing their duty in Iraq, they'll be doing their duty in Afghanistan, and it is my great hope that we also will have the ability to assure their families so there's not 1 minute of stress added to what they already have in their lives. Thank you, Mr. President. And Senator Blumenthal is a co-sponsor. He was in the first 60. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President, with that, I want to thank those who started this Facebook and the grassroots movement that has brought us to over 500,000 people in just a few hours. This is a true grassroots movement, and I thank those people who started it, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from New York.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and I rise today to speak about the crisis that we have, and I guess I ask my Republican colleagues, please don't shut down our government. A shutdown will hurt all Americans, our businesses, our middle-class families, our service members who could see their paychecks delayed. It will hurt this economy. 80% of our mortgages are FHA guaranteed. None can be issued that are FHA guaranteed starting tomorrow. Housing is one of our largest industries on its knees. This will put it on its back. IRS checks that are mailed, where the refund is mailed back, will stop. That's billions of dollars that would be circulating in the economy that will not happen. So we Democrats have been listening to the American people. We want to avoid a shutdown and have met all of the Republican demands on the spending side. Last night, Mr. President, at the White House, Speaker Boehner said to the President, if you go with me, it's $78 billion in cuts. That will satisfy me. The President said, we will get to that number. We have moved in every direction that Speaker Boehner has asked. Now, we believe there should be cuts. There's tremendous waste in government, and I think any Democrat who ignores the lessons of those who voted, the lessons of the last election, makes a mistake. The people did want government to cut out the waste and to shrink. But they didn't say cut everything. They didn't say use a meat axe. I didn't have a single person tell me, and I met a whole lot of the Tea Party people, cut cancer research, cut loans to students who are going to college. Because the American people have wisdom. Cut the things that are wasteful and hurt the middle class, but grow the things that help the middle class achieve a better life. That's what the President has tried to do when he said we are going to out-educate, out-build, out-innovate. And that's what we are trying to do. There are a lot of tough cuts in our proposal, some that I don't like. Every member on this side will be able to find things that they seriously don't like. But at the same time, we have gone to a level about as high as we can go that doesn't cut our seed corn, our future, a growing economy for our people and their children. And so, on cuts, we're in a good place. So why didn't we come to an agreement? Why after Speaker Boehner offered a number and the President accepted, why are we still here today worried about a shutdown that will hurt so many? The answer is very simple. The so-called extraneous riders, these add-ons which have nothing to do with deficit reduction, are standing in the way. Why are they standing in the way? Because a minority of the House, perhaps even a minority, although a large number, of Republicans in the House insist that they be there. They are the hard right of the Republican Party. They're the same people who have said we cannot give an inch on their H.R. 1 bill, which did cut our seed corn, did cut loans to colleges and cancer research. And now they say they have to insert these extraneous riders dealing not with abortion. Federal government can't fund abortion by the Hyde Act, but rather about women's health, about who, not how much, about who should get the payments to do chest screenings and blood tests and cancer tests for women. Now, that battle has been raging for a long time, decades. It has nothing to do with reducing the deficit. So why is it there? Well, let me show you why. In this little chart, this little pictorial representation. Speaker Boehner has said, no daylight between Tea Party and me. Let me repeat that. These are Speaker Boehner's words. No daylight between Tea Party and me. Now, does he have the exact same views as the Tea Party? Obviously not. But he is pulled by them. He has a choice. He can listen to the Tea Party and shut down the government, or he can do the very difficult, and I admit it's difficult, and I believe Speaker Boehner is a good man. I like him. I think he's a decent, honorable man. But he is caught between a rock and a hard place. And the alternative is to take the mantle of leadership and tell those on the hard right that they cannot run the government completely. They will have influence, they already have, but they cannot run the government completely. And they certainly can't impose their social, ideological agenda on a budget process. Frail enough as it is, these riders are the straw that breaks the camel's back and cause the shutdown. Now, Speaker Boehner is trying to say today it is not these riders. It is the budget numbers. But that is belied by two facts. One, he offered a number to the President last night, and the President accepted, $78 billion in cuts. And two, if it were not the riders, as my colleague from Washington State has said, and let me repeat, if it's not the riders, Speaker Boehner, take them off the table. Take them off the table. Tell the Tea Party and the others that this is not the time or place. There will be a debate on this issue. We can guarantee that. And even if we didn't want it to happen, it would. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle would make sure. But not here, not now. Not when continuing the government with all the ramifications is at stake. So what we have here is a flea wagging a tail, wagging a dog. The flea are the minority of House Republicans who are hard right. The tail is the House Republican caucus. The dog is the government. And that flea is influencing what the dog does, more than influencing, right now determining. And it is sad. Leadership is tough. And frankly, when either party goes to the extremes, they don't do the right thing. When Republicans go to the hard right, when Democrats go to the hard left, my experience, they lose politically. But much more importantly, they do what's wrong for the country substantively. Because we are a country that governs from the middle. We are a country that believes in compromise. We are a country of what the Founding Fathers profoundly weaved through the Constitution, checks and balances. And it says two things. When the people want change, a new group will come in, and they will certainly have an effect. Our government is not, our structure of government the Founding Fathers created is not ossified. But they've also said they won't control everything. That's the beauty of our government. And we here in the Senate are the cooling saucer. And that's what we're doing here. We're performing our function. It's a function that the Founding Fathers wished us to perform, many of whom I might note come from the state of Virginia that my colleague from Virginia leads. In any case, we have a serious, serious issue ahead of us. I would say to Speaker Boehner, please, tell the Tea Party folks they're going to get some of their way, but not all their way, and they're not going to get their way on these extraneous riders related to women's health. The battle for whether the government shuts down goes on inside Speaker Boehner's head. If you want a bird's-eye view, people have asked me, are we going to shut down? I said, look inside Speaker Boehner's brain and see what's going on there. And I'm sure there's a lot of torment and tumult, and I sympathize with the situation. But this is a time for leadership. And if leadership emerges, this government, which so many people depend on, will not shut down. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from South Dakota.
Mr. President, the American credit card is maxed out. We continue to add about $1 trillion or $1.5 trillion to that credit card every single year to where it's now at $14 trillion. And the amazing thing, Mr. President, is right now it's about noon here, and between now and midnight tonight, when this continuing resolution expires, and if nothing is done, the government would shut down, we will add more than $2 billion to that debt. In a 12-hour time period, between noon, right now, and midnight tonight, we will add another more than $2 billion to that $14 trillion debt that's growing literally by the hour. And so we have a crisis in this country. And we've had experts tell us, the former chairman of the Federal Reserve, Alan Greenspan, say that there's a 50% probability that we will see a debt crisis in the next 2 to 3 years. Now, just interestingly enough, there was a story this morning in the Wall Street Journal that says Europe's central bank became the first monetary authority in a major developed economy to raise interest rates since the global financial crisis struck, a sign that an era of cheap credit is coming to a close. Then it goes on to say the ECB increased its benchmark by ¼ point to 1.25%. Now, Mr. President, if we started to see an upward tick in interest rates, it would have profound impact on the deficit and on the debt, because the experts also tell us, the Congressional Budget Office and others, that for every 1 percentage point increase in interest rates, it would cost about $140 billion every single year. Now, to put that into perspective, the interest on the debt in the year 2015, if we stay on our current trajectory, will exceed the amount that we spend for defense. So we will be spending more on interest on the debt than we actually spend defending this country.
in 2015. Now, that's assuming we don't see any kind of an increase in interest rates. But if we were to see, as I said earlier, as much as a 1% increase in interest rates, that adds $140 billion every single year in interest costs to finance the debt. This is a serious situation which requires serious action. Now, we have in front of us a continuing resolution to fund the government because we didn't get the work done last year. The Democrat majorities here in the Congress last year did not pass a budget, didn't pass a single appropriation bill. And so we are doing the unfinished work of last year. We're in the now 6th continuing resolution, which, as I said, expires tonight at midnight. If nothing is done, the government would shut down. But there's an alternative, Mr. President. And, of course, the best alternative would be to pass legislation that passed the House of Representatives earlier this year, was voted on in the Senate and defeated, that would cut $61 billion from discretionary spending and take us back to 2008 levels. And if, just to remind my colleagues, in the last 2 years, discretionary spending has increased 24%. That's if you don't include stimulus money. If you add stimulus money, it was 84%. We've seen discretionary spending increase in the last 2 years by 24% at a time when inflation in this country was 2%. So we were spending at a rate that was literally more than 10 times the rate of inflation. I don't think the American people would think it's unreasonable when you're running $1.5 trillion deficits every year, when you have a $14 trillion debt, to think that we ought to be able to go back to 2008 spending levels. That is what the House bill did that failed here in the Senate, and so that triggered a negotiation which is ongoing. But my point very simply, Mr. President, is there is a solution in front of us now that would prevent at midnight tonight the government from shutting down. And it would also fund our troops through the end of this fiscal year, which ends on September 30th. So all we have to do here in the Senate is the majority leader, all he has to do is call up that House-passed bill. We move that. It would fund the government for another week until the negotiators can come to a final conclusion on a longer-term funding resolution that would take us through to the end of the fiscal year. It's very simple. There's a very simple answer to all this. And so there's a big debate about that particular short-term funding resolution. They say, well, maybe it cuts too deeply. Well, all the cuts that are in that short-term funding resolution are cuts that have been agreed upon largely by both sides, by both Democrats and Republicans. And it's to the tune of about $12 billion, which is significantly less than the number that both sides have agreed we ought to cut from the budget this year. It also, as I said, would fund the military, really important, that we fund our troops, that we not put our military, when we're trying to fight 2 wars and perhaps 3, at risk of not having the funding that's necessary for them to conduct their very important duties. And so it would fund the military through the end of this fiscal year. So why will it not be picked up and passed by the majority leader here in the United States Senate? Well, according to our colleagues on the other side, it is because of these ideological riders, this rigid partisanship, this insisting upon things that just absolutely don't have any support here in the United States Congress. Well, I want to point out something that in 2009, the other side was singing a very different tune, because at that time they were passing a big spending bill, and at that time President Obama and then Speaker Pelosi loaded such riders onto a government funding bill similar to the one now being negotiated. And a senior Democrat aide is saying, well, they're not comparable. Well, many of the same provisions, in fact, one of them was an abortion provision that was included in that particular spending bill. And what goes on here to say, and this is quoting a Democrat aide later on, there is a difference between including riders on a bill when they are supported by a majority of the Senate and just need a vehicle, and including riders on a bill because a minority is trying to ram through something that would not have support on its own. Well, just to point out, the rider that was added by the House Republicans on the short-term spending bill is a ban on taxpayer funding of abortions here in Washington, D.C. It would affect 1 city in the country. And interestingly enough, Mr. President, it is a position that has been supported repeatedly by the leadership on the other side. The majority leader, Senator Reid, has voted for this very ban 10 times since 1995. The majority whip, Senator Durbin, has voted for this very ban 9 times since 1995. And, believe it or not, the President of the United States, when he was a member of the United States Senate, voted for that ban twice. And he has, as President, signed legislation that includes that ban. And so to suggest that this is something that lacks majority support just doesn't pass the smell test. You cannot make an argument that it's about ideological riders that don't have majority support when you have people on both sides by large majorities voting for these particular riders. And I think you can't argue that this is an ideological battle because these are things that have been passed before right here in the United States Senate. And I think that most of these, a lot of legislative things, a lot of things that get funded in government are an expression of someone's ideology. Now, there are some of us who happen to believe that the taxpayers in this country should not be supporting abortion. So that taxpayer funds shouldn't be going to supporting abortions. And the broader debate about funding for Planned Parenthood is not just ideological, it is a funding issue. Because they've received somewhere on the order of over $300 million a year in taxpayer funds. So when you're looking at ways to trim government, you're looking at every area of the budget, you are by definition making decisions that in some cases may be based on someone's ideology. But the fact of the matter is you cannot argue with a straight face here on the floor of the United States Senate that this short-term funding resolution ought to be held up over a couple of riders that have broad support by members on both sides and have countless votes, previous votes, in support of those. And so I would suggest to my colleagues here in the Senate that a shutdown at midnight tonight can be avoided very simply. All it requires is for the majority leader to pick up the bill that passed the House of Representatives yesterday, that, as I said, funds the government for another week until our negotiators can come to that final conclusion, that funds the military through the end of the fiscal year, and that includes a couple of provisions that have been supported numerous times by members on both sides here in the United States Senate. A shutdown is totally unavoidable, but it's completely up to the majority to pick up that legislation and pass it. Now, we can't afford to wait to deal with out-of-control spending and debt for the reasons that I just mentioned. Over 40 cents of every dollar that we spend at the federal level is borrowed. As I said before, we've seen discretionary spending increase by 24% over the past 2 years. What the House Republicans have proposed in terms of spending reductions, I think by any definition, I think the American people would find it to be very, very reasonable. It represents literally less than 2% of total federal spending. At a time when most Americans are tightening their belts, most small businesses are tightening their belts, families are having to make hard budget decisions, at least here in Washington, we ought to be making decisions that are in the best interest of getting this country back on track so that we aren't spending money that we don't have, so that we are living within our means, and so that we aren't saddling future generations with an enormous burden of debt, which isn't fair to them, and which, by the way, also has a profound impact on the economy. Everybody makes the argument up here that somehow if we reduce federal spending that it's going to hurt the economy. Well, I would argue the opposite. If we don't get federal spending under control, it's going to hurt the economy. Because you're going to see these kinds of impacts. You're going to see interest rates start going up. You're going to see inflation start going up. And you're going to have people not making decisions about hiring out there in our economy because they don't believe that Washington, D.C. has gotten the message about getting spending and debt under control. And so I would argue to my colleagues, Mr. President, that we have a solution, a very simple solution in front of us. It certainly doesn't necessitate at midnight tonight the government shutting down. I don't think that's in anybody's best interest. I don't know of anybody on this side of the aisle who wants to see that happen. All we're simply saying is it is high time that this government started to live within its means, started to stop spending money that it doesn't have, and starts putting us on a fiscal path that will ensure that this country is around for future generations of Americans and that we don't have young people in the future carrying around an $88,000 debt, which is what their debt will be in a few short years if we don't take steps to get federal spending and federal debt under control. So I urge my colleagues, and I would ask the senator from New York got up and said, please, Republicans, don't shut the government down. I would say to my colleagues on the other side, it's very simple. The majority leader just picks up the House-passed bill, passes it, and this crisis is averted. And the negotiators can continue their discussions on a longer-term solution, which it sounds like they're very close to coming to a conclusion on. That's all that it would require. It's a very simple solution, and I hope that my colleagues will do it and that we can make sure the government continues to function, but that we start to get spending and debt under control. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Massachusetts.